Hello and welcome. Today I have the absolute pleasure of interviewing a cousin, a friend, a role model, a true venture creator, and just a great entrepreneur in person through and through. So thank you for joining me today, Amanda.
You're welcome.
So today for our interview, it's going to be two-part. I'm going to first talk to Amanda about her journey in entrepreneurship, kind of her background and what she's currently doing today and what her company does. And then we're going to take a look at Olay's 24 steps and kind of get Amanda's take on them. So without further ado, Amanda, we hear a little bit about yourself, family background and cultural values.
Absolutely. Well, I am your cousin, as you pointed out. But we come from predominantly Canadian, British background. What's really interesting, I think, is that entrepreneurship is something that really runs in our family. So on my dad's side, his family immigrated from England and started from scratch in the hospitality industry. And on our mom's side, your mom is an entrepreneur in the family, and my dad is also an entrepreneur in the tech space. So it's been, I think, a family paved with role models about entrepreneurship.
Yeah, well, exactly. And that kind of segues us into our next question. Do you have any particular role models growing up? I know you mentioned.
I think I mentioned one of them.
Maybe any of them outside of the family?
You know, it's a tough one for me because I think that my dad has played such a substantial role in for me from a business perspective. Not only was he just a major role model growing up as a parent and a leader in the industry and revolutionizing the technology space and how people bought and sold subscriptions as a service, but also I was fortunate enough to bring him into THP as a shareholder and strategic advisor. So, you know, he was a bit of a bubble for me and was someone that I relied on really heavily on weekly calls, but was also someone who helped push me forward when I was going out for things like Entrepreneur of the Year or Marketing Mag's 30 Under 30. Like, he was a big champion for me in figuring out how to approach those opportunities in the best way possible.
Yeah, well, Gavin's definitely a great role model. So coming out of university, what really drew you to be wanting to be an entrepreneur?
Well, I started in university, which is what is kind of fun about that. So a lot of people may or may not know, but I was probably one of the few freshmen who lost a huge amount of weight in first year. And I did that because the food was just not up to Hopi's cooking. But what I realized is that I had this tremendous passion for food and the kitchen. And so when we moved into our apartments in second year university, I realized that none of my friends knew how to cook. And this was a huge opportunity. There was a generation of millennials that were going to go out into the world, try and start professional careers, and they didn't know how to cook. So a pal of mine and myself started an online cooking show called The Hot Plate, which is such a crazy name. It came out of a late night study session, and we started, and what was so incredible, anytime you talk about a target market, we were speaking to the right people at the right time. We were one of the first YouTube cooking channels. We were speaking to millennials from the perspective of millennials. We were very grassroots, and we really quickly got recognized in the Montreal community. I started getting invitations to be a spokesperson. I was teaching cooking classes at Loblaws, and all of a sudden we had brands like Trudeau coming to us for product sponsorship placements. And it became really apparent to me very quickly that this whole concept of not just cooking, but cooking education and entertainment was really important. And if brands were seeking us out, then this must be a huge need in the market that I didn't understand at that point. So when I was leaving university, I did the safe thing. I took a job as a VP of sales at an experiential marketing company. I was moved to Toronto, living in your house, and I went to get ready for my first day of work, and I realized I'd made a huge mistake. And I quit the day before I was supposed to start, and I decided to take a bet on myself and spent the next 2 years figuring out what this market opportunity looked like, and in 2012 incorporated THP.
Yeah, well, that's a great story, great journey, and I was around for some of it.
Yeah,
so,
you ate some of it for sure.
It was the KFC Double Down, homemade Double Down, that was my favorite. Kind of piggybacking up on that answer, what were a few of the key decisions that you made to go from chef, teacher, to CEO and founder?
There were probably 3 key decisions I made. Number 1, I went all in. Like 100% all in, no distraction. I just committed myself that the path I was on was the path to something that I felt could be pretty revolutionary. And I think taking that leap and trusting yourself is a hard thing to do, and it doesn't always pay off, but I was very lucky. The second thing is I looked for every possible connection that I had to people working adjacently to the industry that I was in. So my friends that went into marketing, my friends that went into public relations, anyone and everyone who touched consumer packaged goods, I tried to figure out how I could support them. Could I be a food stylist at an event? Could I do X? Could I do Y? And that gave me exposure to understanding what were the needs of agencies, but what were the needs of the brands and how were they evolving at that time. And then the last thing that I did was freelance with the service providers. So I actually would go and food style for commercial photographers and understand how they delivered their model and service to the customers, and then directly ask customers, what do you like about this? What do you not like about it? What serves your needs? What doesn't? And what was amazing about making those 3 decisions at the time I did is it was the right place at the right time with the right need. It was a traditional industry that needed to evolve and change. And by exposing myself to the way it was, I was able to see what was missing if these consumer goods wanted to be able to compete in an increasingly social and digital environment.
Awesome. So we kind of buried the lead here a little bit. We haven't quite got to what THP does today. So if you wouldn't mind telling us a little bit about that, that would be awesome.
100%. So THP, when we started and incorporated the business in the end of 2012, we started out as a full-service turnkey provider for content marketing solutions. And what that essentially means is we were the experts in creating end-to-end recipe, photo, video, and social media solutions for consumer packaged goods. And what was incredible about this, if you can believe at the time, in the traditional marketing industry, very traditional, nothing was packaged. You would have to go to someone to develop a recipe, someone to do a photo, someone to create a video, someone else to create a social media post. And the cost of doing all those things in that very fragmented model was chaotic, it was wasteful, it took a lot of time, it was really expensive. With the realm of social media coming in, people were looking, how am I faster, how am I more agile, how do I serve the right message to my consumer quickly? And I really believed if we brought all of those capabilities under one roof, we could create a very efficient way of working, we could create a higher quality of deliverable and service for the customer because they'd have more end-to-end control. We'd reduce marketing waste, which would mean they'd have more money to spend. And by controlling the delivery end-to-end and building our team, we were able to control our cost base and deliver 30+% EBITDA margins in the marketing industry, which is basically unheard of. So it's, at the end of the day, when I try to describe to my grandma what I do, I basically say if you look at a billboard and there's food on it, or you read a packaging and there's a recipe on it, it probably came out of THP's office.
Yeah, that's incredible. Well, my next question is going to be what makes THP successful and what's its competitive advantage, but I think you really just encompassed that with that answer. So maybe we'll kind of go back to earlier days when you're just starting out and trying to make, as you said, you were pretty early on, just out of university. How did you utilize your resources? Maybe talk a little bit about financial resources if you want, but mostly non-financial resources in the early days.
Yeah, so resources are such an interesting thing. I think it's the number one thing people struggle with, whether it's a service business or a product-based business. You have to think about what your inventory is. In the case of services, you're thinking about people's skill sets and talents, and that's a weird thing to think about when you start commoditizing human capability. But I chose the service industry, so that's how I had to think. So for me, balancing resources, when you're trying to build a company quickly, you want to do it profitably. It's very important to me to do it without taking out loans or liens on the business so I could retain maximum control and ownership. I really doubled down on figuring out how do I have the most multifunctional resources possible, which meant that if I went to go and hire a photographer, I needed that photographer to also be a graphic designer or be able to retouch images or had the capacity or desire to learn how to shoot a video. I looked for people that could be Swiss Army knives so that as utilization of different needs peaked and valleyed, I had the ability to flex my workforce accordingly, but still develop the culture and passion that you need in a service-based industry from a dedicated perspective. I think that was probably the number one. I'll be honest and say that from a resource management, when you're building a company as quickly, I wasn't able to put all the right resources around us. So I worked 20 hours a day for 2 full years. But you know, what you learn about that and doing all of those things is you very quickly become very humbled and know what you do and don't do well. And the best thing I did for myself was create a stop doing list. And that was the list that helped me right size what I was doing and make sure that I had the right talent and skill sets around me. So that the business had the resources to grow and move forward successfully and to deliver the customer the most exceptional quality possible.
That is crazy. Well, note to self, stop complaining about online work. You're not working 20 hours
yeah, unless you're getting on a streetcar at 3 a.m. laden with groceries, no complaining.
Yeah, exactly. So you've given me so much information here, and I know you've touched on a few obstacles that you've encountered in the creation of THP, but maybe just for the camera, one last, what's the main obstacle that you had to face in the journey, and what's one way that you solved it?
So I think that the main obstacle that most businesses are going to face is people and culture. I talk about that all the time to my own team, to the team that I'm now part of post of our acquisition, at conferences. It's finding the right people. And I think that finding the right people is a struggle for a few reasons. One is it comes down to the culture, and I don't mean what time do people drink beers and how pleasant is everyone. I actually mean culture is, does your business have a unified mission statement? Is there a set of values or commandments or that single thing that when every time someone walks into the door, discipline, thought, discipline, action, those are the framework and guardrails that help shape how they make decisions. For us as a business, we went through a lot of years where myself or other members of the leadership team were always telling people down what to do. We changed that in our 3rd year, and we decided, you know what, if we empower our people, if they understand what we're trying to do, they get the guardrails, and you give them a ton of empowerment to just do what they do and do it exceptionally well and to hold their colleagues as accountable to that, all of a sudden we were in a completely different universe. Our productivity shot up, our culture and happiness ratings in the workplace went up. There was so much that was positive. We gave our team veto power over every new hire in the business because we figured they knew better than we did. And it was little things like that, those elements of trust, of empowerment that create loyalty, and loyalty creates longevity, and longevity and passion is really what creates culture. And that cycle of turnover will happen, and every business will face it, and it's scary and it's stressful, and those are the calls where you're sort of crying sometimes on the phone late at night to your advisor. But if you can put the right steps in place, it means that you're going to hang on to the really great people, and they're going to grow with you, and they are going to be the people that take you to the next level.
Awesome, I love that answer. So before we get to the next section, I'm going to ask you one more question.
Yeah.
And I think I speak for all of us when we just got a whole lot of unbelievable information there in the first couple of questions. But this question is kind of a pivot to Bill Ole. He says that entrepreneurship is not only a mindset, but a skill set. And I just wanted to hear what your take on that was and some of the biggest skills that you would think an entrepreneur would need in their toolbox.
Oh, what a good question. One of my favorite quotes that I say all the time is disciplined thoughts, disciplined actions, which is from another leader and writer in the business community. But I think it is those two things. I always think it's a bit of a blend. I think skills as an entrepreneur and as a leader in the business, know what you're not good at. Know where you're weak and where you need complement and where you need people to lift you up. I think that analytics, measurement, metrics, discipline is imperative. Even if you're not good at it, you have to understand the metrics that make your business run, and you have to be obsessive about those metrics, because if you don't measure it, you will never have an ability to manage the performance and success of your business and identify those little levers that you could pull that actually make the world of difference when done sequentially. And the last thing I would say, which is my personal bias, but of course everyone's going to bring different strengths and weaknesses, I think is an aptitude for sales. If you can't sell your own product, if you don't believe in it or you don't have the skill set to do it, that's fine. But I've always believed that THP's biggest success is that I was a big part of helping to shape what our value proposition was. And I was so passionate about it that even today, I'll often get on the phone and do an IP or an initial presentation with a new rep to just show them how much I care. Yeah. And I think that doing that is just so powerful. I mean, personally, when we were in offices, I sat with my team. I didn't have an office. It's not about hierarchy. It's about having great people doing great work and everyone operating as equals in as many ways as you can. And, you know, we've seen a lot of success about that. And I think it's been not just successful, it's actually been really fun and it's been fulfilling. And it's hard, but hard doesn't mean it's not great.
Yeah, cool. Great answer, and I think just an overall great part one, so we thank you for that. And now we'll see what Amanda thinks about Bill O'Leary's 24 steps. So for part two of the presentation, we're going to be going over Bill O'Leary's 24 steps to successful startup. Unfortunately, we didn't have time today to go over all 30 of them, but I sent Amanda a 30-minute video prior to talk about Bill O'Leary's steps in detail, and Amanda sent me her answers of which ones fit with the criteria of the project. So without further ado, Amanda, after reading that, which step do you feel like you agreed with the most?
I definitely agree the most with number 8, quantifying the value proposition. You know, as a salesperson, but also someone who's grown a business, I just really felt that by helping to quantify what my value proposition was and what it would mean to decision makers at my customers' headquarters where I was trying to sell the product, that really allowed me to establish what I thought my win ratio would be. What was that first deal size going to be valued at, and that allowed me to create a lot of the models for sales growth and waterfalls moving forward.
Awesome. And then on the flip side of the coin, reading those 24, which one do you feel like was a little bit off base personally for you?
So number 3 for me, I think I had the hardest time with, and it's really just because there is a debate in the sales world of, do you target the decision makers or do you target the end users? And you know, there's solution selling, challenger methodology. There's so many different schools of thought. I'm a personal believer that you need to understand how the end user will use the product, but depending on the type of product or service you're selling, decision makers can sometimes act alone. And so I think what needs to be considered from that perspective is, what does my decision maker need to make a decision, and what is their decision-making process, and who will they engage in that process to get a yes? If the end users are part of that process, then we need to talk about features and benefits really early on to engage and make sure that end users don't become blockers. But end users never become decision makers. And at THP, we do 2 things. One, we work in a very transactional environment working with brand managers, where they are both decision maker and end user. So those 2 things are the same. As I move further upstream selling, you know, $10, $50 million global content decoupling opportunities at enterprise levels, we're dealing with procurement teams that have nothing to do with how the day-to-day operations will play out, but they are the sole decision makers about who gets a seat at the table. And in those cases, what he doesn't talk about, but what's important, is that's where change management comes in. So as a service provider, that's where winning the deal is just step 1 of the hard work. Step 2 is, how do I take what I've won and now sell it into the end user so they adopt that product or service?
Awesome. Well, those are some great answers there. So moving into the second question, which of these steps do you feel like you had the most success with, and which ones you struggle with? We'll start with success.
So I think from a success perspective, I'd have to go with number 10, validating your core. You know, I got to do that early on by trial and error, which was fantastic, but I think what I was able to identify is that the marketing industry was one ripe for innovation and evolution. And so what I noticed is that the way that marketing agencies were delivering creative production services to their customers didn't meet their needs, didn't meet their timelines, didn't meet their budgets, and just wasn't able to deliver the scale and agility required to meet the growing demand that social media was placing on both consumers and brands. So for me, understanding that core, understanding how you're going to make a difference is critical. And if you can identify an industry that is really old school and challenged with transformation, it actually just gives you that much more of an opportunity to really get in there and make a difference.
Yeah, no, I can see that for sure. And then what about struggles? What did you have some difficulties with?
Even something we still struggle with today, interestingly, a little less so, but something it's a constant topic of conversation is step 19, is understanding your cost of customer acquisition. THP is such a metrics-driven organization, but what I've realized over the years is there's two types of marketers. There are marketers who are phenomenal at developing really intelligent, tactical, and strategic marketing initiatives to grow brand awareness and to help us with acquisition. But then there are marketers who are deeply analytical. They understand how all of those numbers actually translates to a cost of acquisition, a cost of suspect, cost per lead, and they can break it down. And honestly, 9 times out of 10, I'm going to pick the more analytical marketer because they're the ones who are going to help entrepreneurs make less mistakes in terms of how they spend their money. And what I mean by that is, that's the marketer who's going to be able to tell me, for every $100 I spend, I'm going to get this out of it. They're going to be the people to say, you know what, don't give me $100,000 or $500,000 at the beginning of the year. Give me 50, let me prove it to you in the numbers, and then we can systematically and intelligently pour more on that sales engine and see what's going to grow out of it. The marketer who's more focused on the tactics has great aspiration, big dreams, probably lots of fantastic ideas that cost a lot of money, but they're not the ones who are going to be able to show you bottom line ROI of what that investment did for your business. And that can mean that a lot of entrepreneurs get really caught up in what looks great and not what's driving the most effective conversion of customer acquisition. And that to me is a lesson I've learned a couple of times over the last 10, 12 years.
Yeah, for sure. Well, that's super insightful. It's crazy what the marketing world has been able to do recently, just in terms of metrics and stuff like that. So.
It's amazing, and I'll be honest, is there's lots of technology out there, but someone who's got a half-decent knowledge of Excel is all you need. It is actually not that hard. If you can do basic division, you can figure out your cost of acquisition, but I can't tell you how hard it's been to train some people to think that way.
Yeah. So not as many people who say they're proficient at Excel are actually
proficient
at Excel.
No. I've learned proficient as a wide definition.
Well, before we wrap up here, just any advice you have on after reading these steps, any advice you have for me implementing them in the future?
You know what? I think that the two most important things I'll say is this, and I will always be this person for you, is you have to have a strategic advisor standing behind you that can be brutally honest, that can tell you when you're getting off track, that can tell you when you're deviating, or tell you when you're losing focus from what the core objective is to getting your business off the ground. And I think distraction or spreading yourself too thin is one of the most common pitfalls that many entrepreneurs face. And so right off the heels of that is, if you want to attract a great strategic advisor, you need to have a great plan. Doesn't need to be crazy, it doesn't need to be creative, but it needs to be disciplined, it needs to be thought out, and it really probably needs to cover, a lot of the steps that are covered here, because that is going to mean you've thought holistically about your market opportunity, you've identified your customer base, and you have a plan on how you want to go out and get them. And then you can measure success and performance from there and figure out what's working and what's not. So disciplined thoughts, disciplined action.
Disciplined thoughts, disciplined action. Well, I just wanted to give you a massive thank you for doing this, sitting down. I know you're super busy, so having the time to do this is absolutely awesome. And I think I speak to myself and the class when this is going to be really impactful and they're going to learn a lot from it. So thank you.
You're welcome, Gil. Good luck.
Thank you.